So I'll just say, first of all, does anyone know what like a good yield is? So just think about your stocks and your bonds and your investments. What's a good yield on the stock market?
10%.
That's an amazing yield, right? Like if you're making 10%, you're doing great, right? Like 5% is like your benchmark, like it's doing good, right? If you get 5% back on your investments, that's good. 10, woo, doing awesome. Interestingly, that's about the same as the yield on crops, specifically on wheat. That 7% would have been like a good harvest, and 10% would have been an amazing harvest. 30% or 30 times yield, that would have been incredible. That would have been astounding. Like that would be, you would have abundance, you would have wealth. 60%, 60-fold, 100-fold, like these are like incredible yields, right? And so we have to remember that putting that into context of the reading of the scripture, remembering also that what's the sower doing? How valuable is this seed? Is he being conservative? He's investing it everywhere, right? He's buying up stocks that don't even exist. I think it's important to remember that perhaps, just perhaps, that good soil produces enough seed to cover for all the rest of it. I'll just put that there. My message today is very simple, which is if you're not ready, that doesn't mean that you're not worthy. If you're not ready, that doesn't mean that you're not worthy. And I'll tell you that I have had a kind of a breakthrough working on this mindful self-compassion program. I had a breakthrough that I think I had wrong doctrine about Christianity for a long time around the concept of shame. How many of you ever heard a sermon differentiating guilt and shame? Right? Which one's the good one? Which one's the bad one? Right? You're supposed to feel guilt, right? Because you did something wrong, but you're not supposed to feel shame because you are something wrong. Right? How many times have you heard that sermon or that message preached like, oh yeah, you did a thing, but you're not a thing, right? You might have done something stupid, but you're not stupid. You might have failed, but you're not a failure. I've heard so many sermons on this. And you know what I realized? I realized that I had an ethic about shame. I had shame about feeling shame. Because if I felt shame, that meant I didn't know that I was loved by God. And I'm not supposed to feel shame. I'm not supposed to feel bad. I'm not supposed to feel wrong. I'm not supposed to think I'm a failure because I'm loved by God. And if I think any of those things, if I have a feeling of shame, then I have failed at being a person of faith. And so I had to not feel shame. I even went so far as to take shame out of my lexicon of feelings. I wouldn't say I feel ashamed anymore. I'd be like, nope, translating that, guilty, guilty. We're moving away from shame. And there was like that was the only bad feeling. Does this resonate for any of you? Or is this just me? Maybe this is just me. Maybe I'm just preaching a sermon myself, which is fine. Sometimes you have to do that. So I'll give you an example. So I'm down in Oregon this week, and I go to my aunt Ruthie. Ruth Ann Duncan has a farm, and she has sheep on this farm. And I go down to visit her, and I bring Asher with me, and of course he's really excited about the trampoline, and that's all he wants to do for like 20 minutes, and I'm like, that's fine. And Ruthie's like, hey, there's one of my sheep got bitten and may have like an infection, and I need to go like clean it up and cut the wool away and put some ointment and stuff on it. Can you help me? And I'm like, yeah, sure. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but I could get some mucking boots and go out to the barn, and then we have to find the sheep, and there's like blood. I was wearing a jacket to protect the wool, and there's some blood on it, and we're like, oh, this might be a little bit worse than we thought. And so we like have to corner it and like convince it to get in this room, and then my job is to hold on to the fur on its cheeks, just hold on to it while she deals with the wound. And it's long enough since any of you ate that I'll tell you what this was. She's like, oh no, it's got fly strike. Does anybody know what that is? Yeah, you don't want to know what it is. You're about to learn what it is. It's when flies lay eggs in a wound of a living creature. So it was just teeming with maggots. And it was like a hole in this sheep's neck, and she'd just spray it and then scoop. And they were just all over the floor of the barn. I'm talking like hundreds in its throat right here. And I'm holding it by the face while she's spray, scoop. She had to go get a tool, and it just kept going deeper and deeper into her. There was a second bite, and they would just go in. Oh my God, it was, whoo! You ever had those moments where you're like, I am keeping my lunch. Right now, we are keeping the lunch. And she just was having this revelatory moment every couple of minutes, like, oh my God, this is way worse than I thought. This is way worse than I thought. Have you ever had that? You get into something and you're like, oh, this isn't that. Oh no, this is, oh shit. Yeah, it was like that, but just ongoing. And then my son gets done with the trampoline, and I'm like, okay, circle of life moment. I can't stop holding this sheep's face. Here he comes. He's gonna see this. But he doesn't have that gross out thing that a lot of us adults have, right? So he's like, oh, what's going on? Well, that's interesting. Meanwhile, I'm keeping the lunch. So we get done, kind of. Eventually I need to go find my kid because I can't hear him anymore, and he's somewhere. It's quite a large farm. And so I'm like, are we good? Can I let go of this sheep? And she's like, yeah, I think we're good. So I go find him and come back, and we hang out for a little bit, and we leave, and she thinks, I'll go take him to the vet tomorrow, and he'll help out, and he'll clean it up a little bit more, whatever. So we come back 2 days later to hang out a little bit while Leanne's in rehearsal, and I ask, hey, how's our sheep doing? And Ruth Ann's countenance just falls, right? And she says, oh, yeah, she died. She died. Yeah, it had gotten really bad. The vet went and looked at her, and her jugular vein was completely exposed. So that was not going to heal well. It was just going to be so vulnerable that sheep was going to die. And she was very distraught. And you know what I noticed immediately? I immediately, almost reflexively, took her hand and told her, it's not your fault. Because that has always felt like the right thing to do as a pastor when someone takes responsibility for something that seems too big for them, right? She was taking responsibility that this sheep had died. She failed, she did wrong, and this sheep is now dead because she didn't, whatever. And I immediately, with my creative brain, I'm like, well, you couldn't have controlled that, you didn't make this happen, da-da-da-da-da. But what was amazing was I was trying to prevent her from feeling shame. I was trying to stop her from feeling that feeling. Because to me, that feeling is an indictment of your faith. That if you feel shame, you don't actually trust that you're loved by God. And so I was trying to stop her from feeling a genuine feeling. Now, fortunately, my aunt is also a psychoanalyst and a Jungian therapist, and she didn't need me to save her from her feelings. Thank you very much. She didn't get mad at me or anything. She just kind of almost looked at me like, no, I feel this. And I kind of uncomfortably was like, oh, I kind of took my hand back, and then felt really weird about the fact that I had done that. Perhaps felt a little shame about it. The thing I've been realizing is that I decided that was the one feeling that didn't get to be a feeling, right? Every other feeling, I'm like, fine, if you want to have a feeling, Feelings are feelings. They are not for judging. If you're angry, you're angry. If you're sad, you're sad. If you're disappointed, if you're resentful, if you're frustrated, if you're worried, those are feelings. What you do with them is what matters. But shame was not a feeling that I thought was okay. That was a wrong feeling. That was a bad feeling. How many of you have a bad feeling? More than one, probably? That's right. That's right. That's right. I think they talk about that in the book, that a lot of women, especially, feelings of anger are bad feelings. Anybody have despair be a bad feeling, a wrong feeling, when you have to pretend you don't feel? What are some other feelings that were wrong and bad and you should never feel them because they're an indictment on your character? Sadness? Guilt? Fatigue. Ooh, shit! That's an abyss, friend. Woof. Oh. Well, one of the things that this book has been teaching me is this idea that shame is just like every other feeling. That shame is an innocent feeling. It doesn't mean anything about you for you to have a feeling of shame. It doesn't mean anything about you for you to be sad. It doesn't mean anything about you for you to be fatigued or guilty or angry. It's an innocent feeling, and it's a universal feeling. Everybody feels these feelings. Every single human that has ever walked the earth, including Jesus, has felt these feelings. And every feeling is transitory. We feel it in the moment. Why was I so afraid of shame? Because I thought that shame wasn't a transitory feeling. I got the feeling confused with the belief. Right? What's the belief that's produced by the feeling of shame? I'm a failure. I'm unworthy. Exactly. But most often, the feeling of shame is really the fear that we're not lovable. It's more, I think, better rooted in that fear. The fear that there's something that could separate us from love. And when Paul says that nothing can separate you from the love of God, not height nor depth, not principalities or powers, nothing on the earth or above the earth or below the earth, blah, blah, blah. He says all that stuff, and I get this sense that, like, well, that if I feel that, then I don't have, like, right doctrine or something, right? I'm not with God. But what if it was just a feeling? And what if my job was to feel the feeling so that it didn't turn into a belief? Because so often I was just trying, like with my aunt, I was trying to get her to not feel the feeling because I was so terrified that the feeling was actually a belief. And so then it was put on my heart. If you're not ready, that doesn't mean that you're not worthy. If you're not ready to deal with the feeling of shame, it doesn't mean you're not worthy. At least that's the message for me. And I think about this, the ground, right? And how often we interact with this parable of the sower, and we think about the ground, and we think, well, some ground is good ground. You can grow out of this ground, but you can't grow out of these other types of ground. I can grow in my sadness, my disappointment, my fear, my misunderstanding, my confusion, even my resentment. But I can't grow from a feeling of shame. That's an unworthy piece of ground.
You just have another glass of champagne.
Champagne gives me a headache. Put some pineapple juice in it, though. See, the thing is that the soil is just the place that we are in our life. It's not our spiritual health and maturity. It's not whether we're right. It's just where we are in our life. And sometimes we get this inspiration from God, and it can like do a bunch of amazing work in our life. And sometimes we get it, and it's competing with a bunch of other stuff and deadlines and things we got to do. We got a full plate of stuff, and we're feeling pretty fucking tired right now. You know, and sometimes it just it can only go so far. We can only learn so much from it. Right? What if the job wasn't to make sure that the seed produces an insane quantity of seed? What if the job was just to let it do whatever it can do in the ground that we're in right now? Because God doesn't seem to give a shit about where the seed goes, right? God's just like, you want some? You? Yeah, everybody. Let's do it. God's not like, oh, well, you're angry, so I'm not working with you. You're sad. You're tired. Shit. I'll work with somebody else who's happy and full of energy. That is definitely not God's MO. God's like, whatever you got, I'll take it. Wherever you're at, yeah, we'll work with that. Why? Because I love you. And even if you're not ready to love you, that doesn't mean you're not worthy of my love. I think we've been misunderstanding this parable because God will take care of the harvest because God took care of the planting. That's all God's job. What's the soil's job? To just be there. How often are we trying to be somewhere else? How often are we trying to feel something else, trying to think something else, trying to be somebody else, instead of just taking a minute and being where we are? The crazy thing about mindful self-compassion is it's not going to make you feel better. And so many of us are like, why would I do it? Is it not 12 easy steps to make my life better? They're not 12 easy steps. They're really fucking hard steps. And all of them are about showing up, right? They're not about being different. They're about allowing yourself to be where you are, right? And that feels like the hardest work of all. See, one of the things I know that Paul doesn't expect what I think he does, because he says explicitly that faith is a gift of God. You cannot struggle and strive to become a person of faith. It is a gift of God. And sometimes our life is the hard-packed earth, and it's just not going to break in at that time. And if we just knew that's where we are, we could accept it. And sometimes there's a little bit of it that breaks in, and a little bit of it can grow, and then it withers. But guess what? Now it gets to become more soil. We're always undergoing this process of transformation. We're not trying to get somewhere. We're not trying to just be the good soil. We're trying to be wherever we are. So how are we receiving, not the seed, not the word, how are we receiving the soil that is our life?